everybody. Want to tell a story?
It's time for Comics Kids!
Hey Comics Kids, it's Mr. Craig here from the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Green Bay, as well as the virtual Boys and Girls Club National, and Boys and Girls Club Creates some really cool arts things. Yeah! But we are so close to being done with our comics. I don't know how to contain myself. This is really awesome. Last time we learned a little bit more about how to color our pages. Check it out. This is what we did last session. We colored in our pages using traditional coloring tools like watercolor, markers, colored pencils, things of that nature, pastels, and that's the results of what we got. But now look, there's a lot of white space showing here, and all these middle panels, those were the ones that I'm going to do on the computer. Alright guys, first and foremost, we're using Photoshop once again, and Photoshop is a wonderful tool. It can be something that kids jump into right away and get something done, but it's going to take you a long time to really learn everything about this program, and don't get upset by that. So we're going to start out right now, and I'm going to use Photoshop in the lines that I've created. I've created a series of black lines on the page of all the artwork and put it on a separate layer. So now I can, on another layer underneath there, I can go in and actually paint underneath those lines. So and I really want to do that. I want to be underneath the line a little bit so that there's no white that's showing up right at the edge. And that sometimes you won't even notice it, but it will be there. But now once you have those outlines done, and I can do this relatively quickly because again, I've done this for a long time, but some of my students, when they're starting to use a mouse to draw these lines, this is all done with a mouse, and I can get that little mouse to do all little fancy tricks for me because I feed my mice cheese. No, I don't, Mr. Craig lies. I just really have used this quite a bit I've had to use the mouse to draw before, and it's not the ideal tool, not at all, but I've made it work for me. And I'm using a pencil tool right now, and I'm going in and I'm taking the color of Baghead's hoodie, and I'm going in here and just drawing underneath the line to try to kind of capture the edge of the hoodie. And I'm going underneath the line just a hair so that it shows up. And if you look there, there's a gray line that's right underneath there. And now what I can do is shut off my layers, shut off my lines, and go in here with a bucket tool and go blooch, just like that. And now look at that, it filled in that whole area, and now that color is dark, but it's not so dark that it hides my black lines. You don't want to have your colors being too dark so that all of a sudden your darks get muddy. Don't let that happen. Keep your tones just a hair lighter than that, and you'll be able to see all of the wonderful detail work that you've done, and it won't disappear. But again, as we're creating this, if you mess up the line, don't hesitate to back up and erase it and start again. Because you want to do this one time, but do it really well that one time so that you never have to do it again. That's a huge thing that you can do. And now, again, I could go in here and shut off the lines, or I can go in here and kind of color in or pencil in is what I'm using the pencil tool, but I'm using it to color, so it's definitely using it to color. Go in here and just fill in that gray. If you miss a spot, will it show up as white? Absolutely. So you got to be real careful and use your eyeballs. Use your eyeballs really well in order to see exactly what's happening there on the page. And I actually have a whole layer that's dedicated to just this color. One of the things that kind of works for me is to bounce around the page. Once I have my palette set up that I want to have this gray used, I can go from panel to panel with the same gray and fill it in, and it's so much easier than coloring all of one panel in at a time and having to go back to capture all of the colors that I needed. So here, shut off the layers, go in with the bucket, and blooch, there we go. We've got our color filled in. But now, before we get too far with us at normal speed, because that's what that was normal speed, and it took me probably 6 hours to color in the whole page. You don't want to watch Mr. Craig painting for 6 hours on that sheet. You've got TV to watch, video games to play, chores to do, dishes to wash. So you've got other things to do. I'm going to speed up the footage so that we can kind of get through that process a little bit faster, but you still can see all the progress as we're going. So check it out. We're filling in some blank areas, okay? Trying to fill in these larger areas. We can go in later on with one of our tools and add some shading as we develop it. If we look here at some of the grasses and the trees in the background, we have a light shade and a dark shade. And why do I do it like that? Oh, okay, good. Yes, it's because it's atmospheric perspective. I'm glad that you guys remember that. I like to talk about that every once in a while, don't I? Get over it, Mr. Craig. Again, filling in these big, bold areas with basic color makes it so much easier. But now let's take a look at these ice cream cones. I want to do something special with them. They look so flat the way that they're drawn here, but if I put a little bit of a highlight spot in there or two, and then a shadow, just a slightly darker shade, it can give so much dimension and volume to our ice cream cones, and it makes it so much cooler. Like I'm doing here with a little bit of light coming down, but you don't want it so harsh that it looks fake. You want to turn it down so that it looks like an actual three-dimensional tone as you're working. And cleaning up different shadows as you're working is another possibility that you can do. Going in and coloring in the grass. You can make it really good and do it really fast. Make it so that it looks just like it should do. And then you're going to make it once or twice or maybe two. And again, just when we're making some of these bold and basic colors like the water here that I'm doing, we can always go back into it and add a little bit of shadow to make it stand out just a little bit. Capture it and take a look at that. Add a little bit of shadow in there, and it makes for the shading to look just that much more interesting. And cleaning up some of these little white specks that are showing up that got lost and got picked up by accident. The sky is yet another thing that you can work on and actually add a lot of different tones. It's so easy to make a gorgeous sunset type color. This time I'm going to leave it a little plain though, because I don't want it to steal focus from some of the big water examples that we have in there, because that looks so cool. I want to have that big area of watercolor to be some of the focus. And these background skies, I'm just going to leave them a little plain because it will make it that much more interesting in the long run. And with those words, sometimes my lettering got a little bit messy, so I'm going to probably want to cut those apart and clean that up, and I'll show you how I do that. Well, check it out how I'm using some of the same tones from the background, from the watercolor, and pulling that into the foreground. So I'm using colors that I've already used to make this thing look as awesome as possible. And go in here and work on some teeth and some colors and tongue a little bit. See what I can do to kind of make it look as consistent across the panels as possible, which is important. And actually go in with on a whole nother layer and add some shading so that we can add this dark area in there that people can kind of see and wonder what's going on. Oh, I forgot to color in his lunchbox. Let's make it a purple. And this is going to be like the only purple that's on the panel or on the whole page. And I can add a little shading and clean that up so that it looks like it's three-dimensional. And you definitely need to color in a sandwich if you're going to have a sandwich on there. Get your sandwich the right color. But as you are creating all the different colors on the page, you're bouncing around like a crazy person. And don't be afraid of it taking a little bit of time. If you get bored with it, which happens. It happens so easily. Some of my kids can only color for an hour if they're lucky. And if that's the case, by all means, take a break so that you're not wearing yourself, so that you still want it to be a little bit fun and a little bit of a challenge. Yes, indeed. Look at the highlights you can add and then really control it with just adding a little bit of subtlety. And that's the thing, is you don't want it to be super strong. You want it to be, all your light sources to be a little subtle, unless you were trying to make something that really stood out. Now, one of the things that I've been able to do is go back in here and with the black lines, clean some of that up. So if I wanted to have some of my line work from the watercolor level show up, I can clean some of the black out of there, so that is a big focus. And I'm doing that on my fish a little bit here, as well as the dock lines and things like that. We don't have to see those lines. Those lines are there with colored pencils. Let's let that show up. Let's let that be the cool part that you see. Another thing that you can do too, forgot to get the ice cream cones. Another thing that you can do is to go back into the black line and actually color that with different shades so that it stands out. And on the background, I actually, look at here, I'm going in, cleaning up all of the background black lines and just letting the black lines from the initial work show up, the center lines, so that I can grab a hold of all that stuff, grab a hold of that middle part, and make boxes and make a little bit of a white line around all of those boxes. It took a couple of different steps to do that, but that is going to make those boxes in the center stand out just that little bit. And then of course go in here and clean it up so that you can actually see the colors that were underneath, because that's important too. You got to be able to see that. And like the dock, we can't see the dock, so let's clean that up. Now, when I look at this, I see these words, and I'm going to grab them, move them over a little bit, and then the last chomp is a little sloppy, so I'm going to cut it apart and go in here and copy paste it so that I can use the same letters, but make it a little bit more legible. Legible is a word that means readable, so I can read it better. We want our audiences to be able to read our lettering. And actually, when I look over at the grumble, that's terrible. I need to really clean that up and go back in here and paint it away. Paint it away. I had to paint out that middle part and go in here and actually copy and paste and cut apart these words so that I can actually make the word where it's touching, separate it a little bit and make it that much more legible. And you can see that it's much more readable the second time around than it is the first time around. And I'm using the same lettering that I did. Actually rotated some of these letters just a hair, and it made it that much more readable. Grumble. And I'm also going to put a color around the outside of grumble to make it more readable. And what better than a green when your tummy is upset? Cleaning up the outside here just a little bit further. Looking great. Going in and working on my lettering and enhancing the lettering, making some of it a little bit more dark and larger so that it gives an emphasis to certain words. And fitting it within the bubbles and making it almost always the same size. So you want to try to have a consistent size when you're printing your lettering. And for me, like a size 12 or 14 is a pretty good sized font, and it works really good. Oh, check this out. My gosh, this is like a sun explosion, and I wanted to make this little bit of a sun flare that shows that the ice cream was there. Do these taste fishy to you? I'm gonna try and fit that in and make another tail. We always want to work on those tails and get it going towards the direction of the speaker, not necessarily touching them in the mouth. Some kids think that has to be the case, where they're touching them in the mouth, and it doesn't have to be that way. It has to be like it's going towards the person so there's no confusion. Now, when we're making our title for our page, we want to try to pick out the one that's got the right feel. And once you do that, I like to put like a different outline around the outside so that it stands out. It's a little more readable. You can go in and add a little bit more color to the water so that it looks a little more realistic or gives a little more variety. But I don't want it to hide my watercolor either, so I'm going to make it a little bit transparent so you can see through it. But also this face, oh no, where did Tommy's face go? Well, it wasn't that great. So I'm going to go back in here and rework it, get the color for his tongue and rework that Tommy, rework his little face until I've got it at least a little bit better. And that, I think, is not a little bit better. That's a lot better than what I had. So I can live with that one. Very nice. One of the last things that I ended up worrying about here was the reflection of the fish in the water. So I grabbed the fish and flipped them upside down and then just kind of used a couple of different tools in Photoshop to try to capture some ripply looks. And at first, some of these didn't work out that great. They looked a little bit like water, but not quite what I was looking for. And honestly, none of them looked exactly the way I wanted it to look. I wanted it to look like water ripples, but I couldn't quite get that. So what I ended up doing is picking one that was close and going in here with the flipped over fish, lining them up with the fish that are there, and then cleaning up that layer so that the one kind of can be seen through the other one, and then softly flaring in that other side so that we can see what we have in the water. And the whole thing is coming together really, really nicely. I'm very pleased with how it looks. And you should be pleased with what you're creating as well. If it's not quite the way you want it to be and you want to change it, go for it. The eyes, I want to go back in here and clean up his eyes. And when we're working on eyes, gang, don't be afraid of putting a little bit of a white speck in there. That little white speck is actually light reflecting onto the surface of the eye. And if there's a little bit of moisture in your eye, like if you're still alive ultimately, there's a little bit of a white reflection from things around you that actually make it look like there's a little bit more character and life in the person that you're drawing. So these, look at that page. Oh my gosh, that looks so good. I'm so pleased with that. So that's what we ended up with. After all the drawings and all the inking and all that stuff was done, and all the coloring that's done with traditional tools, I spent a whole bunch of hours just working on the color in the computer. This is what we have when we're looking at the traditional art colors. And now this is what the page looks like when we take into account all of the other colors that we've added to it. This is what a finished page will look like. And I'm very pleased with that. But the one thing I look at it, and I like it a lot, but it's missing something right here in this space. And I'm thinking, the whole page is kind of about Baghead wanting to go on an adventure by himself, and then kind of getting Tommy bursts in and takes up his time. And it's not something that Baghead really wanted to happen, but all in the long run, he had a nice afternoon with some ice cream with a friend. So I could probably put a little quote down here about friendship, which would be very appropriate when I get it printed. Holy mackerel, you guys. This was a lot of work, but it's also going to have a huge reward for us when we get a chance to make something that's one-of-a-kind piece of artwork. We are this close to being completed with our ComixKids series. And there's a couple of other videos I want to add that maybe talk a little bit about history and maybe about how you can publish your pieces, things of that nature. And who knows, maybe I'll feel ambitious because there's one I'd love to do about diversity in comics. We have come a long ways, you and I. And hopefully, fingers crossed, if we can do something on a national level for a comic book, that would be a dream come true. That would be so amazing. I don't even know how to make that happen. But I'm going to try to get some t-shirts made. And if you get a comic done, we'll find a way to have you send it in to us so that you can get a t-shirt and be part of a comic with us. That would be awesome. I'm Mr. Craig from the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Green Bay and the Boys and Girls Club Virtual Club, as well as Boys and Girls Club Creates. Maybe you want to start creating some comics just for you. Tell us your story. What makes you unique? What makes your voice interesting? Because everybody has something worth sharing with the world. I truly believe that. Get out there and start making your comics, everybody. See you soon.